So, hello everyone, and yeah, thanks to Sian and Ben for the invite along today. As Ben said, my name is Shona Nicol, and I head up a technical data policy team in Scottish Government. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Cohort project that we've been running, which is looking at data maturity in the Scottish public sector. It's a project that we've actually just completed, so we've got some kind of findings, and I'll hopefully share them with you as we go through this. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So really just a little bit of context here around why we thought why we needed to do data maturity assessments for the public sector in Scotland. So Scotland does have the Scottish public sector has a vision for data, that data is systematically used to improve decision making, saving time, money, and lives. And really, for us, it's all about that reuse of the data that we all collect and manage as individual organisations. And actually, that's where we get a lot of the value from our data, is in that reuse. We've also got a number of strategies that kind of reference data. So we've got the digital strategy, which was published last year, which is called A Changing Nation: How Scotland Will Thrive in a Digital World. And that's a joint strategy between Scottish Government and, central government and local government. And I guess that sets out a number of commitments around data, kind of really highlighting the transformational role that data can play in government, and that we need to be a data-driven nation. Another strategy is the Scotland's AI strategy. So again, it's a whole range of actions, some of which relate to data, and recognises that the data infrastructure that we have in Scotland, that the right and kind of high quality data is kind of crucial to Scotland's AI future as well. So we've got a little bit of those, that context around why data is really important. But if we go on to the next slide, please, what we find is that there are actually a number of challenges that we have within the public sector around data. And almost as individuals within public sector organisations, these are quite difficult to solve ourselves. So we ran workshops probably a few years ago now, really focusing on data standards, actually, which was my previous role in Scottish Government, to understand why people weren't implementing standards with their data. Some of these challenges are going to be really kind of none of these are going to be surprises to people. So it goes, things like fragmented landscapes around data, not necessarily sure who's leading or what the vision is around it, that there's limited use of data-driven decision making. There's lots of scope for improving that within the public sector, that there's a bit of disinterest and maybe lack of investment in data. So a lot of public sector employees are still not engaging with data, that there is a sort of data literacy skills gap. We have legacy systems, data sharing is complex. People don't necessarily know the data quality. They don't have governance or management of data as well. Now, none of these things are specific to data standards. They actually impact anything that we want to do with data in the public sector. So in my team, these things are the same problems that we face when we're trying to do open data, when we're trying to do data innovation. So I think what we're saying here is we can't simply keep saying the same messaging about data standards and open data to people and expect to see organisational change. If we want to see organisational change, we realise we were going to have to address this in a slightly different way. So if we go on to the next slide, please. And I guess this is just, what are we doing? How are we going to do that, kind of address these challenges? So next slide again, please. And I guess the way that we are kind of approaching it within Scotland is we're looking at developing something called the Data Transformation Framework. And really that's about improved data capability across the public sector, and that process to help organisations become much more data fluent. So this idea that we'll be able to set out what good data looks like, and the sort of process that people can go through, or organisations can go through to sort of reach that and improve the way, the value of their data asset within their organisation. And basically it's a programme for changing the way organisations think about data and the way that they value their data assets. So next slide, please. And the framework itself is made up of lots of different elements. And the kind of the one that I'm going to focus on here and the rest of the talk is around that diagnosis. So helping people understand where their problems are. And the way that we're focusing on that diagnosis is through using data maturity assessments. But the other elements that make up this framework are, understanding that the public sector is doing lots of really, really good stuff already, but it's not that everyone can find it. So, pulling together that knowledge base, to help say, well, actually, this organization has done something about this particular challenge, and maybe that can help you as well. So pulling together that knowledge base is another element. Developing pathways. So if people are at that very early stage that they want to write a data strategy or a data action plan, help them through what steps they need to take to get to that point. And then once they're ready to implement, again, thinking about the different pathways that will be helpful to them doing that implementation. And I guess the big thing, the final element of the framework, and to me, the biggest thing here is about that collaboration. So it's really, really important that all of us in the public sector learn from each other, because we've got lots of really good practice going on as well. So we want to make sure that we've got that data community, those experts, all sharing their good practice and what they're doing around innovation as well. Next slide, please. So yeah, as I said, that's part of the development of this data transformation framework, and it is a work in progress right now. We knew we needed a kind of tool to do the diagnosis. So we did a little bit of work looking at different data maturity assessments. We kind of settled on Data Orchard for lots of reasons that Sian has already mentioned, that it's standardized. We didn't want to have to make up our own data maturity assessment and have to manage that over time. We wanted people to have a sort of shared view or understanding about what we meant by data maturity. We wanted something that was online, that people could do themselves individually or even as part of a group. And that, could be done quite quickly, but would give us a bit of a good sort of overview of where organizations were in terms of their data maturity. So next slide, please. So yeah, we've been running this data maturity assessment project. I always call it a learning by doing project, in that we didn't necessarily know where we were going to go with it. Other than that, we were going to ask that cohort of 7 public sector organizations to undertake a data maturity assessment. So the cohort was made up of 7 organizations. That was a mixture of central and local government in Scotland. And we had, I guess, 2 key outputs from the project. And the first one was that we would support that cohort through a number of things. So firstly, we would help them understand what their business objectives were around data. So where did they plan to, where were their organization trying to get to with data? Get them to undertake a data maturity assessment so that they would get a picture about where they currently were and what sort of challenges they might be facing. And then to identify, I guess, the actions required to improve their data maturity. So kind of, do that, work out what they needed to implement and start that implementation, and over that period of 6 months. So that was one bit, we provided the support around that. The second thing that we were trying to get from this programme was that the Scottish Government would learn and get an understanding of what the challenges that the public sector were facing around data, and that would help us develop some of those key elements of the data transformation framework as well, the stuff that I've already talked about. So the idea is we kind of suspected there were going to be shared collective problems, and maybe out there would be some shared solutions to some of those problems as well. So, the idea is we would be able to pick some of those up. Next slide, please. So you'll have heard a little bit of this from Sian already, but in terms of the process, we ran all 7 organisations through a data maturity assessment at the same time. So we did a little bit of work with a lot of help from Data Orchard. We got organisations to pilot the process before they went out to their organisations. We made sure that they did lots of communicating with staff, so both kind of their leaders and also just the more general workforce as well. Really getting people to think about how they were going to communicate this. And Data Orchard actually supplied a lot of like a great resource pack that had lots of this information in there already for us to share with the cohort. And then after, you kind of during and after the assessment, because each individual organisation had a dashboard, they were able to monitor responses to see, were they getting the right numbers responding? Did they need to go to different parts of the organisation and try and get specific teams to answer as well? And at the end, each of the cohort members got all of the data from the people in their organisations, and some information about the different themes that they might be challenging, or ones that they were doing really well in as well. And then for Scottish Government, we got the anonymised data back, and we were able to get a final report as well that sort of set out the key findings, I guess from the assessment itself. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So I guess this slide was really, I'm sorry for the small text in this, but I just wanted to talk through a little bit about the findings that we had from our first cohort. So I guess the really interesting thing for us is it's provided us with, I guess, really, very primary indicators, I guess, on the current status of data maturity in the Scottish public sector. Now, we'll need to validate these findings, in the future, and we are running another cohort later on in the summer, so we'll be able to use that to validate them. But I think it gave us some really interesting and useful information about where the challenges kind of lay in the public sector. So I guess the areas that we were identified across the whole cohort for improvement were the themes of tools, analysis and skills, and some were also needed to improve in leadership as well. But the first graph, these two graphs I just wanted to talk over really quickly, because again, they say something about data maturity that I think is interesting. So the first graph is really just showing you the spread of responses by organisation, and you can see here that there is a bit of disparity in results. So there isn't a consensus really of opinion across all of the organisations about where their scoring should be. And I think this says something about the likelihood that there's maybe pockets of good practice in organisations, and that will allow those individual organisations to follow up and find out where they are and see if we can learn anything from them and share that with the wider cohort as well. And the second graph is just about the percentage of time people spent working with data. Now, at the beginning of the assessment, we added in a question around personas. So we wanted to be able to understand the types of people that were answering the assessment. And from all of the responses around, I think it's about 49% of people's time was spent working with data, and that's across all the different personas as well. So I think one of the things we've taken away from this at the sort of Scottish Government level is that we've got lots of staff time is being spent working with data. There's lots of data in the public sector that gets used for lots and lots of different purposes, but there's lots of effort, and we're not sure that we're seeing that optimizing of the data, getting the value from the data as a kind of strategic resource. So I think we've learned a massive amount from doing this. As I say, I think we still have to go back and validate some of these findings, but it's a good place for us to start. If you go on to the next slide, please. So, I guess what have we learned from some of this? And a little bit of this is repetition from what you've already heard from Sian. So the assessments themselves are more valuable than just simply the scores alone. So, what we've got from the assessment is a little bit of information about, just a little bit more detail than what you would get from the score alone. And although we do need to validate it, I think it's given us some really interesting places to start, in terms of developing that data transformation framework. What are some of the big challenges that organizations are facing? And if we're looking at the themes, tools and skills and analysis, those are the bits that we'll start at. And I think we found lots of really interesting things about that difference between organizations being quite good perhaps at managing and storing data, and really being thoughtful about security and governance, and GDPR, but maybe less good at sharing it, at making it open data, or having the infrastructure to do the analysis with as well. So it helps us think about, well, what do we need to do to help organisations improve in those areas as well? It can be really difficult to get buy-in, and if you don't have buy-in at a senior level, it's almost, you're not going to get anywhere with your data maturity assessment. So you've really got to think about buy-in at the very beginning. And actually that preparation that you can do around doing a data maturity assessment can really help with that as well. But I think what we've discovered from, from the cohort that we were just running, get that senior leader buy-in as early as possible, because it's going to really be important. But that preparation and all of the stuff that you're doing around data maturity, I think, as Sian was saying, it's great for motivating people within organisations. It's great to get that engagement and get people thinking about data in different ways as well. And a lot of the organisations within this cohort ran either data awareness or data literacy campaigns at the same time as they were doing the data maturity assessment. I would say they maybe ran them, and maybe we ran them in a different order, but I'll come on to that in a minute as well. And then finally, I guess it can be really hard for organisations to get started with data maturity. It's a really big thing, and it can be difficult to understand where to focus. It can feel like there's just lots and lots of problems that you've got to solve. And I think the maturity assessments, again, really help organisations to think about where to put their focus. And not just as individual organisations, but the whole cohort. I think it's been really useful to understand that we've all got the same set of problems around data. That as organisations, you're not all, everyone is in that problem space with you, and you can talk about it and you can share, that pain almost. But it's not just about sharing problems. It's also about sort of sharing ways to solve that as well. And I think what we found is different organisations approach things in different ways, but sharing that information with others has been really, really, really great as well. I guess you feel support when you've got all other organisations going through the same process as you as well. So if you go on to the next slide, and this is my last slide as well. So just very quickly talking about where we're going with this. So we're about to run another cohort programme later in the summer. We've got 10 organisations, or we will have 10 organisations signed up this time. Again, it'll be a mix of central and local government. And we'll be using the findings from that cohort to validate the cohort 1 findings as well. And the idea is that we'll just keep running cohorts to help, I guess, start moving some of these public sector organisations in Scotland on in terms of their data maturity. I think the thing here as well is we're not trying to abandon cohort 1. We're going to try and look to see how we can integrate them into this new cohort as well. So people, again, don't feel like we've just done 6 months and then they're on their own, because that's not what we're trying to do here. All of this is about developing that data transformation framework that we're trying to get to. Based on the learning from the first cohort, I think we'll be moving the design of that 6-month programme round a little bit. I mentioned that some of the cohorts ran data awareness and data literacy kind of projects at this, in that 6-month project. And I think the feeling is that we should have done them at the very beginning, and the data maturity assessment coming along after that, so that you've done a little bit more of that buy-in, awareness raising before you start the data maturity assessment. For the first cohort, we dived straight into data maturity assessment, and it was fine. But I think, this time round, we will just change the order of things. And then finally, we are doing a bit of work on user personas as well. And I guess this is all, and it ties into this concept that what we're trying to do here is do a program of change. So trying to understand, the different change agents that sit within organisations and what they will need to help them improve. And all of that will help us develop the framework as well. And I think that's everything from me. So I will stop talking now. Thanks very much.